This is a story called The Evacuees Bid for Escape Due to Cruel Treatment. A group of young kids have been told that they will all be getting evacuated and that they had to come to school the next day with all the things on the list that their teacher, Mr. Wood, had given them. This included their gas mask, which they were supposed to have with them at all times. The following day, Mr. Wood gathered all the kids up and took them to the train station. When they got there, their parents were waiting to say goodbye. Then he got the kids on the train and took them to their destination, with their parents standing on the platform waving a tearful goodbye. When they reached their destination, which was Blackpool, Mr. Wood took them door to door trying to find them temporary homes for them. He wanted all the siblings to stay together, which was hard because most people were only willing to take one child. Some people wouldn't take any because they had several kids of their own. Some people just shut their door in their faces. There were over 40 kids altogether for Mr. Wood to find temporary homes for. So far he'd only found home for 5 of them. They walked and walked and knocked on door after door for hours and hours, but no one would take any of the kids. It started getting late and all the kids were tired and hungry, so they went back to the hotel they were staying in. Early the next morning after breakfast, Mr. Wood took the kids door to door, and this time he managed to place 15 of them with temporary foster parents. He was still left with quite a lot of kids to find homes for. It was proving to be quite difficult as most of the kids that were left were brothers and sisters. One family of 4, 2 girls, Callie and Grace aged 10, and their 2 brothers, Michael aged 8 and Jason aged 6, were all placed together with people who looked after them really well. Eventually all the kids except for 2 brothers, Andrew and Paul, had been placed. Mr. Wood tried in vain to find a foster home for the boys, but no one would take them. Then, as luck would have it, the next door Mr. Wood knocked on, the couple agreed to take the boys. However, right from that very first day, the boys were treated badly. On the first day, the lady, Mrs. James, made them eat 1 cold pork sausage each, and when they said they didn't like it, she still made them eat it. The kids didn't have anything else to eat for the rest of the day, and they went to bed hungry. The next day the boys were out playing when a gang of about 8 boys came up to them. One of them said, "What do you think you 2 are doing?" Andrew answered him saying, "What does it look like we're doing? We're playing. This is where we play. There's no room here for crummy evacuees. Why don't you go back to where you both came from?" "We can't go back to where we come from because it's not safe." "Well, you can't play here because this is where we play. We can play where we want to play and you can't stop us, so don't even try." Then the gang of boys suddenly jumped on them and beat them up. When Andrew and Paul went back to their foster home, they were both punished for fighting even though it wasn't their fault. Mrs. James hit them hard with a belt. When her husband, Mr. James, came home, she told him what had happened, and he too hit the boys hard with the belt. That day, Mr. and Mrs. James refused to let the boys eat. Instead, they made them stand and watch while they ate. When the boys moaned that they were hungry, the couple finished their meal, hit them with the belt again and sent them to bed. A few days later the boys received a letter from their mum, but Mrs. James refused to let them have it. She said to them, "I'll keep this. Have you boys written a letter to your mum?" Yes, we both have. Right, give them to me, please. Mrs. James took the letters and she told the boys that she would post them, but she didn't. She kept them. A few days after this, the boys' mum came to visit them and they had to pretend that everything was okay and that they were happy living with Mr. and Mrs. James, even though it wasn't true. About 3 days after their mum's visit, the kids decided they'd had enough of Mr. and Mrs. James, and they tried to run away with a friend who had been evacuated with them and was also being cruelly treated. The boys all had roller skates on, but Paul fell over and hurt his ankle and broke the wheel on one of his skates. He couldn't go any further and he told his brother to go without him, but he refused, saying, "I can't leave you here. You'll never get back on your own. Besides, we're brothers and we stick together." The boys went back to their foster home and they told Mrs. James that Paul had tripped and gone over on his ankle. They took him to hospital and they said his ankle was just badly bruised. A couple of weeks later, the boy's mum was supposed to come and visit, but she didn't come because she had to work. Of course, the boys didn't know this because they didn't get her letter. On the day she was supposed to come and visit, the boys went to the train station to meet her. They stayed there for hours, waiting for her and checking every train that came in. Of course, she wasn't on any of them, and the boys couldn't understand why, and they were bitterly disappointed. When they got back to their foster home, their foster parents wanted to know where they'd been. When the boys told them, Mrs. James said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you. Your mum can't visit this time because she has to work." The next time the boys' mum visited, they had to pretend that they were happy and settled living with Mr. and Mrs. James, like last time, even though it wasn't true. In fact, they were desperately unhappy living with Mr. and Mrs. James, and they were beaten on a regular basis for silly things, like not making their bed properly. When the boy's mum came to visit again, Paul gave her a piece of paper saying that he'd drawn her a special picture. When she opened it, it said, "Mr. and Mrs. James are cruel to us. They beat us all the time. They starve us and withhold our mail. We hate it here and we want to go home." When she saw what Paul had written, she read it aloud and then she asked Andrew if it was true. He said, "Yeah, it's true." Then she asked Mrs. James if it was true and she denied it. However, Andrew and Paul lifted their clothes up and showed their mum the marks on their back. She said to Mrs. James, "My boys are coming home with me and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that you are never allowed to look after another child." Once they got home, the boys got over their ordeal and life went back to normal. They went back to being happy, normal little boys who were allowed to play as much as they wanted. When they were naughty, they were punished, but not in the way Mr. and Mrs. James punished them. The couple were banned for life from working with and looking after children. After the war was over and the boys grew up, Andrew became a firefighter and Paul became a police officer. The end. Thank you.